quite a juxtaposition here. On the one hand, of where is the economy? How much more do we need to keep us going? On the one hand, as we're trying to put a new economic team together, what is your assessment of how bad the economy is right now?
Well, we have an unusual split screen character to the economy today, in the sense that the period between now and full distribution of the vaccine is a period of acute need. And post-vaccine, and I do mean post-universal distribution of the vaccine and post-vaccination of a high percentage of Americans, we should see strong growth. Now, it's interesting that this is very different than the conditions that Mr. Biden found upon becoming vice president in 2009. It's a really interesting contrast. At that time, the stock market was falling, unemployment was rising, the economy was weakening, and the worst was yet to come. Today, it's quite different. Unemployment is falling. The economy is moving into recovery mode, albeit fitfully. The market is rising, and the outlook is better. And so here we have a more temporary but acute need than we had at the beginning, for example, of 2009. What's needed now is the following: a stimulus bill, an additional version of the CARES Act, which includes funds for stopping COVID, masking, distancing, vaccine distribution, tracing, and so forth. Additions to the to unemployment insurance, where the pandemic premium, as people call it, expired a while ago. Temporary assistance to states, further assistance, and perhaps further assistance to small business. Those are the four things I would think should be part of a stimulus bill that should have been passed before the election, ideally would be passed in the lame duck session of Congress, but at worst needs to be passed immediately upon the new president's inauguration.
So Roger, we're all mindful of the fact that there are a lot of people hurting out there, and we don't want to ignore the fact that every day some people are really having a tough time. But at the same time, is it a matter of timing? Because you talk about it looks like we're going to have a universal vaccine sometime next year. Or is there permanent damage that could be done in the meantime? We have Lael Brainerd, a member of the Federal Reserve, saying if we don't get fiscal stimulus, there could be what she called permanent scarring. What is that risk?
Well, when Biden takes office as president, there will be about 10 million Americans unemployed, about 2/3 of whom will have become unemployed by virtue of the eruption of COVID and the economic plunge that resulted from it. And that is a really serious problem. And I believe, I didn't see her remarks, but I believe what she's referring to is the need for targeted assistance, which I would define as an increase temporarily in the amount of unemployment insurance available to the unemployed, and perhaps the reimposition of a direct payment to low-income households. We saw $1,200 a household in early to mid 2020. I think we probably could use that again temporarily. But I think she's referring to the need for that targeted assistance over the next few months to avoid a lot of those people dropping out of the workforce permanently.
Roger, we have the immediate problem, as you describe it, over the next few months or so. Take a step back in the longer scenario, though. As I say, we have President-elect Biden announcing his economic team. How much is it realistic to expect a new economic team can redirect the economy fundamentally? You've been in those rooms in Washington. How much can the administration do in the longer term?
Some of the answer to that, David, depends on what can be legislated and what can't be. And we're all familiar with the very thin majority that the president-elect's party, the Democrats, are going to have in the House. It looks like it could be as little as 6 or 7 or 8 votes majority. Some races still uncalled. And the uncertain makeup of the Senate. Either McConnell will remain majority leader because the Republicans hold a majority through the outcome of the Georgia Senate runoffs, or if the Democrats win them both, then Schumer becomes majority leader. But either way, it's hard to govern when you have the opposing party in a majority in the Senate, or just a 50-50 split in the Senate. Very hard to govern. So if the President-elect Biden coming up into office had more running room from a legislative point of view, the answer to your question is you can do quite a lot. But it's going to be challenging. But to give you an example of one thing that could be done if there can be some bipartisanship, both parties agree on infrastructure. Both parties agree we need a major federal initiative. We haven't had one in a long time on roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, and the like. And one would hope that whether McConnell is majority leader or Schumer is majority leader, that we could see an agreement on an infrastructure initiative. But when it comes to matters like President-elect Biden's care workers agenda, which I find very impressive, or in a different vein, his climate agenda, it's going to be hard to legislate those given the likely makeup of the new Congress.
What about one specific aspect of the economy that President-elect Biden has been very outspoken about, and that is the aim to reintroduce some racial and economic justice. That is to say, address some of the economic inequalities in the country. Something, in fact, we heard from Chair Powell about specifically, that it's not just a matter of doing the moral thing, but also it would be better for growth. Are there things that a Biden administration can do, even if they don't have control of the Senate, in that area?
That's a hard question to answer because it depends on what you think you can achieve by executive action as compared to what you need to do through legislation. I think the right answer to your question is both partly economic and partly various levels of criminal justice reform. Now, when it comes to the economic side, I said a moment ago that we probably could use a reinstitution of the $1,200 per family payment monthly to particularly low-income households. Because one reality of this 2020 recession has been the degree to which it has badly deepened, the inequality divide in this country, which was already way too big. And Blacks and Hispanic Americans are particularly victimized by this recession. So if there could be agreement on the right type of stimulus, additional stimulus, that would respond to the question you're asking in part. Some of the criminal justice reform issues are state and local issues, not federal ones. And so, although there can be a federal role, but there's also an important state and local role. So it's hard to tell precisely what can be done because it's hard to tell what there can be bipartisanship on. Can some of this be done on a bipartisan basis? After all, President Trump did succeed in passing the First Step Act, which was an important criminal justice reform legislation. And maybe this, too, can be the object of further bipartisanship. But it's hard to know that right now.
Roger, let's turn, if we can, from your role as economic statesman to your role as head and founder of Evercore for a moment. Give us a sense of how the C-suite is reacting right now to the Biden transition. What is the sentiment in the C-suite? Are they in a panic about possible taxes and need to get deals done? Are they looking forward to more stability? What's their attitude right now?
Well, let's just step back a moment to a month ago today. A month ago today, we were within a day or two of the election. And today, a month later, the reaction of at least the large-scale business community in this country is one of giant relief. There's no doubt about that. The business community is looking forward to a period of greater predictability, stability, more thoughtful approach to governing. and the like. So the answer is lots and lots of relief. You have different views in the business community as to whether they think divided government with the Senate in Republican hands and the White House in Democratic hands is a good thing or a bad thing. Some think it's good because it imposes limits on what can be done, and some think it's bad because it means gridlock. But generally speaking, the business community is very much welcoming this new administration. No doubt about it.
Roger, are you seeing, or might you anticipate the possibility that at least for some CEOs, their eyes might turn overseas more than they did under the Trump administration? Because there was a lot of trade strife. We know there were a lot of issues, a lot of sanctions, things like that. It appears that that may ameliorate somewhat. And also we see actually right now, we're seeing the stock markets, for example, overseas really come back strong. Does it open up more international deals?
At the margin, yes. But David, keep in mind that if you are a multinational with, say, for example, half your revenues outside the U.S., you don't have the alternative of paying less attention to your non-U.S. business. You have to. And you have to do that whether Donald Trump is president or Joe Biden is president, whatever is going on in the Congress and so forth. At the margin, yes, I think, again, the business community will welcome a greater degree of predictability and stability and a less tariff-centered international economic policy. They're going to welcome that because the tariff-centered approach that President Trump used did not work very well. Just look at the way China managed to succeed despite it. And so I think the answer to your question at the margin is yes.
We talked earlier about what looks to be good news on the horizon sometime next year with a widely distributed vaccine. Is the business community, and particularly the leadership of the business community, are they anticipating a possible, let me call it snapback, that in fact things might get better really fast after that happens?
Well, it depends a bit on the business you're in, of course. But I think the answer, generally speaking, is yes. I mean, we could see an extremely strong second half of 2021. And I think the stock market is anticipating some of that with this recent additional run-up. I mean, the market in November rose more than all but 4 or 5 months in the history of the stock market. I think it rose 11% in November from memory. I might be wrong slightly on that number. But so I think the answer is yes. And if you look right now at housing, and you look, for example, at autos, they are very strong right now in a way that you really wouldn't have anticipated looking back to March when the virus erupted, the lockdowns happened, and so forth. And consumer spending and the early data on Christmas sales between e-commerce and traditional brick and mortar retail is fairly encouraging. The economy is not doing nearly as poorly now as you would have thought it would 7 or 8 months ago. And that's because while the shock to the economy was massive in the second quarter, we had the largest decline in GDP ever recorded, the policy response was also massive, monetary and fiscal. The fiscal response at its peak was at a 30% of GDP run rate. And the monetary response between the 4 largest central banks around the world was an increase in their balance sheets of $17 trillion. And the result has been rather a draw, as Jason Furman puts it, in terms of the U.S. economy. The policy response rather held the U.S. economy stable.
Thank you so much to Roger Altman, Evercore chairman and founder.